Okay, so I'm just going to do a screen share if I can and go through the email, and we'll rip through and give you all the tough questions targeting Darian because he's got the data lens and he's new to the team. So he's going to get all the tough ones. That's how it's got to go down. All right. So the framework here, and I won't go into too much depth, but it does map to why we wanted to select these specific indicators, is thinking about how we can leverage historical data on a geographic basis to then track towards impact, like target goals around these indicators over time. So we really want to get some robust data, historical data on a geographic tier basis where available, to then inform like where resource allocation goes over time, setting it with our goal, like our goal tools, right? So we're like a goal analytics type platform, but that's why the historical is really important, and then mapping to future targets, right, around issue areas. So that's the framework, and we wanted to start with some to get our teeth into the data, and then we could see 15 to 20 indicators over time scaling out. But if we can't really nail it with 5, 10, 15, you can't nail it with 40, right? So we figured we got to start somewhere and put a framework around it, and then dive in and have some open conversation around it. So that's the backstory. Going into the actual lead thoughts and questions here. So when we think about students in poverty, life expectancy, percent, cost burden renters, these crime rates, we need to anchor to one KPI in a sense per sub-bullet to then drive and understand the coverage on a geography by geography basis. So that's kind of like on Will and I to confirm what is the actual number. So if it's unemployment, it's percentage unemployment. That's the indicator that we want as an example. Or crime rates, like there's multiple indicators, it feels like, around potential crime rates. So at some point, it doesn't have to be on this call, but that's the type of information we need to then drive the coverage analysis and the purchase. Does that make sense? I'll stop there.
Drew, when you say coverage, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Kristen mentioned the coverage on, let's see.
Social needs index, but he had originally also had the infant mortality on the list of sample data he was interested in. So I let him know in advance about the coverage.
Got it.
Coverage, and then so he decided to not include that. And then he also had some back and forth about the social needs index, and I think it has that 40. I calculated the percent of tracks that actually have a value, and explained the original purpose why that index was created. And so those are his initial list of sample data had quite a few geographic coverage caveats.
Got it. Okay.
And let's say that crime rates, we don't have great coverage over the last 10 years with the PolicyMap data. Maybe quality of life, there's another measure that you all might say, well, you know what, we have coverage of this for this KPI, and that could map. Those are the type of collaborative discussions we'd like to have, but we wanted to start somewhere here. So my gut feel is like total population across zip code, county is probably pretty strong coverage, is my gut feel, right? But we know social needs indexing doesn't have a ton of coverage. I think 2018, was that right? And it was 40 plus or minus 40%. So we might not buy that because the coverage isn't create enough value for us with that example. That makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
However, I will say that most of the indicators within that social needs index are available with full coverage.
Yeah. And so that ties here that we maybe just want to buy those 6 indicators, assuming that the coverage is great there. And then maybe we could do some calculations. And it looks like it was on a state-by-state basis. And I haven't done all the research on the social needs index, but maybe we can buy the 6 and then create the calculation, and it gets to coverage potentially, or not. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's bullet 1. Bullet 2, assuming that for each indicator, so the example here, if it's total population, assuming we bought total population as a data indicator set, we would get all years available and all geographies, like nation, state, where the X's are. Is that the right assumption or the wrong assumption? I don't know.
Kristen, you want me to take this one, or you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the population's only going to be available for the years for which the census data is available. So, for instance, you could get it for 2000, also for 2010,
Mhm.
and then for selected years after that based on the American Community Survey.
Mhm.
So, one caveat to that is that while we can provide you with historic community survey, American Community Survey data so that each year you have data, the census says that you can't compare them if those are overlapping. And you may, if the year ranges are
Mhm.
overlapping. Do you know, am I?
So I think, and that was one of the questions, right? So if we look at population age and it says 2005 to 2009, I was like, one of our questions was, does that mean it's split out in the data 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, or is it an average across that grouping?
It's a rolling, it actually represents all of those years. So the sample that the census took was some people in 2005, some people in 2006, some people in 2007, 8, and 9, and then put it together and said, okay, you can't call this data 2005. You can't call it 2007. You've got to call it 2005 to 2009. And so that's why we denote it that way.
Okay.
The census does do estimates with smaller time periods, but we use the 5-year estimates in PolicyMap because those have the best coverage and they're the kind of highest accuracy. So it's what that makes the most sense. But so yeah, we use generally the 5-year estimates in PolicyMap.
Okay.
And
so
it has smaller geographies too.
Mhm.
So if you're looking for tract, the only way to get tract level data is to use the 5-year estimate.
okay, got it. So if we just keep it really simple and total population is a simple one, right? So if it's the state of California where I'm based, if it was 40 million people in 2005 to 2009, that's going to be one number, right?
Yes.
That you will provide us. Okay.
That's right.
Even though it fluctuates, I'm sure on an annual basis, that's the number we would get from you all.
Yep, that's
Okay.
right. And in this grid, you can see what I was talking about in terms of not comparing overlapping years for those year ranges. So you see that we have 2005 to 2009, and then we have 2010 to 2014. And that is because although the census released data for 2006 to 2010, you can't compare it to 2005 to 2009. Forget about the 2010 right there, because that is like its own sort of beautiful, pristine, right, enumeration that can be compared to all of this. It's good. It's good. You can compare it to everything. So that's why we have all of those, is because you can compare, you can make a trend chart out of all of these years of data.
Okay, got it. And since Will is the brains behind the operation, I'm sure he's memorizing all this and we're getting it recorded so we can reflect. All right. So
can may I ask a question? So you would put 2010 and then 2010 through 14 on the same trend line?
Yes, you can do that.
Okay.
And we have the blessing of the census. We will never provide in this grid years that you cannot compare.
You are being recorded. That was a statement right there. Okay, so the answer here on this question, each indicator we'd get all geographies available versus just the smallest. That was kind of a silly question, but okay, I'm seeing a nod, so that makes sense. And then this was to your point, the range of years. I actually I thought that it would be broken out by year, but now we understand the range. So that's super helpful on the clarity front there. And then this is the big one. The geographic coverage by indicator by year, potentially by demographic data. So I don't know, I'm sure you haven't dug into the spreadsheet, which was an aggressive send on my end, but the concept here is that if we think about population and let's say it's 2005, and this is the data set, the coverage, it feels like we have to have a coverage column, at least for us mentally, to know, hey, you're going to have 100% coverage for, well, it wouldn't be zip code because that X isn't there, but for 2010, PolicyMap is going to be able to provide for all states, which would be 100% coverage, versus how many zip codes do you have coverage-wise on total population. So is that easy for you all to pull where it's like, okay, if it's zip code specific for population, your team could actually put in, oh, for total population for 2010, we have 100% coverage for zip code, but we only have 60% coverage for county, as an example. I know it doesn't make sense, but is that easy to do for your team?
It's something we can do.
Okay.
We don't currently do it. So I think we need to regroup around that ask.
Okay.
And I would preface it, Drew, just, I mean, what I said before is probably important, but yeah, the ones that you selected, most like of the list that you are like focused on right now, they all have really good coverage. Like that's really an exception. Like literally the infant mortality is probably like the worst coverage. And like I said, we, generally wouldn't even include that, but it is really valuable still for some of our users, but that's very much like an exception, and which is why I mentioned it. But just so you know, it's not, though there certainly is insufficient data for some indicators, it's not going to be like far below 100%. It's, like nothing like with the infant mortality or the social needs index.
That's really helpful. I mean, we just kind of we had no idea what that, if it was like, oh, that is kind of the norm or that's the median. We didn't really know.
No, those are very much exceptions.
Okay.
For sure.
And just one more point about the coverage. Kristen mentioning that reminded me that in some indicators, you will have slightly less coverage for certain calculations that we do, like percent. If you take percent of Black population, right? If the denominator is less than 10, we don't calculate that percentage because it would not be very reflective, right? So.
Okay. Cool. Elizabeth touched on this, the social indexing need. So it sounds like because these 6 indicators, and again, I'm jumping all over the map here, but the 6 indicators that roll up into the SIN sounds like coverage is strong there. So it would make sense to buy those 6 indicators. Just talking out loud in a group setting here, but that's where my headspace is at. So if we can just confirm the coverage by geography, depending if that's something your team's willing to do, or you might just say, hey, Drew, for all of these, it's 90% plus and you got to live with it. And I think that's then a discussion we have to, we'll have on our end, but that's, if we feel confident that it's high percentage, then I don't want you all to do more work that is unnecessary too. So I guess the question is then on the calculation of social indexing needs, someone who doesn't know how that calculation really takes place, can we then just create the social indexing needs number based on those 6 indicators, or why couldn't we, I guess, if the team knows?
So to go to your coverage question, what I need to refresh my memory about is the population not in the labor force and whether or not that data comes. I need to remember where that data comes from before we can confidently say that all of the indicators are greater than 90% coverage.
On the 6 that roll up, you're
yes.
saying? Yeah, got it.
So I will look at that in just a moment. In terms of making the data yourself, that is something that we have thought about doing to update it and to do it for full coverage of the United States. And we have not undertaken it. And I believe it's because, as you mentioned, it's relative to the state. And so there's much more work involved there. But Kristen and Darian, please correct me if I'm wrong. Do you know if it's relative to the state?
Yes, it definitely is.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought. And so
because but I mean, I don't know that it necessarily would have had to. I mean, with the Opportunity Zone program, that was kind of important, particularly important, I think, but you probably would want a geography of reference of some sort, but I think it was definitely the state with the Opportunity Zone program, because that's really what made the most sense. But you could certainly create a different type of social needs index, and even adjust the component variables if your team wanted to. But yes, in this case, definitely more work with having the reference be the state in each case.
Cool. Okay. So that'll be a follow-up question on the unemployment piece, or Elizabeth, what was it? I haven't memorized it. The one that you mentioned on
The population not in the labor force, and I'm looking that up right now.
Okay, cool. All right, and then the last two are probably the easiest ones here. So is there data, and I've done a pretty good amount of digging in on your website, but is there data outside the US that you all provide? No? Okay.
No, unfortunately.
Gotcha. And then for recognizing 2020 data availability could be an option. Where are you all at on that front as data's coming your way, or you all are tracking it down?
Darian, you want to field that one since you were most recently? Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess it depends on certain data sets, but I know, we are working through some of the census data. That one, a lot of that has yet to be released in its kind of final form. Some of it is still preliminary. Some of it is obviously kind of their redistricting, but only really at a higher level, not down to the block group or, census tract level yet. So I know, we'll be working through that pretty much as soon as it kind of comes in and as soon as we have it in a form that we think is ready to go. And then, I don't know if we have a hard and fast rule on this, but any other data sets that do get updated, we do try and have them out as soon as possible. I think the one thing to note for this year, and obviously, it's kind of everybody, COVID has probably pushed a lot of those dates back, I would say, and just even, the organizations and kind of whoever's getting the data out. I know we've seen a lot of kind of delays and things, even with the census data, usually that would be kind of rolling out by now, but it's very much looking like 2022 for some of that. So I guess it kind of depends. That's not a great answer, but.
I mean, the last 2 years is all unknown territories, uncharted territory. So that's fine. I think the underlying question to that question, at least on my end, is do we wait and not purchase? Like, should we wait until the 2020 data is available and then we purchase? Just being really upfront, right? So I think that was kind of where my brain was going. So.
With the flat files, we do provide quarterly updates. So, and what you would be getting is an update for any data that you're licensing for which there is an update at that time.
Okay.
So,
cool.
Yeah.
So if we have those 15 or 20, then we can confirm when's put a range on potential update is expected within the next 3 months, 6, et cetera. And then we would actually be able to get those updates on an ongoing basis. But is the subscription model though, is it a one-time purchase and then you get updates, or is it ongoing fees? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's an annual purchase. And what that includes is, like, if you were to, license, we delivered the data, in a few weeks, then you would get that delivery. And then we have quarterly dates for which we deliver updates to our flat file.
Within that 1 year subscription, at the end of that year, that we have to renew. And then if you renew, you get ongoing updates. Is that the right?
Yeah. So you're paying upfront for an annual subscription that includes updates throughout the year. Again, for the data for which there is updates available.
That makes sense.
And I would just add to that with the census 2020, the approach we took with the 2010 data was as soon as anything was released, because as Darian mentioned, there's a sort of rolling basis of release. We will do all hands on deck, get everybody ready, get everybody working on it, and get it up. So you will be getting sort of iterative census 2020 data as the census releases it. And so regardless of when you subscribe, you will be getting, as Kristen said, you'll be getting those updates, but it may be, it'll just get better and better as the census provides it.
Cool. Makes sense. So basically buy now and then the data will come and you'll get it. It's kind of what I'm hearing. Okay. Cool. Will, anything top of mind on your end as we're all kind of thinking through this?
No, I don't have any additional questions. That don't make sense.
I just wanted to point out, which you probably noticed, but with the students in poverty, that is data that's available at the school district level, which is just different from the other data that you'd be licensing. So I just wanted to make sure that works with you to it does have historic data, so you can certainly track trends over time, but just at a kind of different geography.
Cool. All right. So what Team UpMetrics will do, we'll regroup. Will and I will probably jump on a call here in a minute, and then we'll circle back with an email with probably a high level quick recap and potential next steps, and we'll keep it moving if that works. And then Elizabeth, if you can kind of confirm, or part of the recap could be, hey, let's just confirm that this coverage for this indicator for the social needs is high percentage, that will then drive the purchase probably. So.
Yes.
Cool.
I almost got there.
I did notice, Drew, that it was highlighted in bold. I didn't know, it said look at sample PM data for educational attainment. Was that something you wanted to look at for some reason during our call, or was that more of a?
No, I think we covered all the questions. I think that what we need to do is just make sure that of those 15 or 20, we know what each one is, like what that number is, if it's percent, if it's like income, like the dollar, like, because the sample data is very robust and lots of information. We don't need all of that, right? And to a certain degree. So it's kind of like, what are those 15 or 20 that we absolutely need, and just make sure that those 15 or 20 are the ones that we're going to get with high consistency on coverage, and we're kind of game for it.